Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness. Dr. Schwartz, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking time to be with us today as we once again are at a point we've been at before in our communities here. Certainly we think about back in November of 2021 in the wake of the shooting at Oxford High School, and we think about even recent events with threats being made to several schools across the state of Michigan. And it's a traumatic event for anybody that's involved, whether they were at the scene of any of these shootings, sheltering in place, a parent from afar, and a first responder. So where should we start in terms of helping each other recover and begin to cope with the events of Monday night in East Lansing?
Well, I can't believe we're here again and we're having this conversation again. I feel like we were just doing this. You know, really, the number one predictor of people getting through trauma is community. And so making sure, and I've seen it, I saw it last night, I'm seeing it this morning, I see it on social media, I see it on the news, I see it just personally, reaching out to everyone right now. And people are offering, people in Lansing are offering, hey, if your kids don't want to be on campus, send them to my house. I'm okay with that. How are you doing? Were you affected by this? What can I do for you? And I think that is where we start, is just letting people know that you're there and that you are willing to help.
And for those on campus, for students, some who may have been affected in many different ways than others, being there for your fellow student can be a really important first step, because you are in that close proximity. You do have that shared experience with them. And so,
Yes.
But it's also important for those students too to focus on their own recovery and their own coping in this situation too, because everyone's going to be affected in a different
100.
way. So for those students that want to help each other but are also going to be coping themselves, what is your advice for them on how they can manage both simultaneously, or if they should be managing both simultaneously?
They 100% should be talking to someone right now. Okay, all of the resources that are available at Michigan State right now, or a lot of students do have their own personal therapists. I reached out last night to all of my clients at MSU and families who have students at MSU, and just said, I'm here for you, whatever you need. Make sure your kids are talking. I cannot stress the importance of, just, even if you feel like it's not affecting you, it is, and just getting it out and talking about it is the first step in getting through all of this.
And then from a parent's perspective too, their kids were at various parts of the campus last night during the events of the shooting, from the initial shootings at Berkey Hall and at the MSU Union to throughout the reports of shootings at various places across campus, real or not, in those moments, and especially given the lockdown of the campus and all that went on last night, parents also are going to be heavily involved in this recovery too, and they need their own recovery. So for parents, what is your advice on where they should start, both in coping with their child being in harm's way potentially last night, but also helping them provide whatever resources they need or support that their kids may need to work through this step by step?
Well, I think number one, parents are going to need to talk just as much as the kids are. I mean, it was traumatic for the parents. I mean, going through it, because they didn't know if their kids were safe, or not knowing what was happening. Obviously, everybody was holding on to whatever information they could get, but there was so much information going on, some true, some not, that that increased the stress of everybody. So I think it's important for the parents also to have their community to do some research online, or with the schools, or with their own resources, to learn how to work with their kids who have now endured a trauma. So they need to help themselves. They also need to help their kids and be strong for their kids. Their kids are resilient. They will get through this, but it's going to be a process. And as long as they're on top of it and they are proactive about it, then everyone will get through this the way that they need to.
Peter Sagal from NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me had a really interesting tweet that caught my eye last night. It was, quote, just sent a text to a friend in East Lansing where there's an active shooter saying, are you safe? And realized she did the same thing for me when it happened in my town in July. And we think about that from a local perspective too. Many students that were at Oxford High School in November of 2021 are now students at Michigan State. We heard stories last night of a couple of students who spoke with local news outlets from Detroit and from the Lansing area as well, who had just started at MSU in January at the beginning of the second semester of the regular proper school year, and once again are thrust back into that situation. So from a professional perspective, what is if there's a protocol or if there's a certain way that you go about addressing that from someone that already has this sort of traumatic experience and has been in recovery for that for almost 2 years at this point, a little over a year and a half at this point, and now is in a similar situation at a place where they're separated from where they were previously at the first incident?
Mm-hmm. I mean, unfortunately, we have zero control over the things that happen around us. Yeah. And hopefully in treatment and recovery of what they've already been working on, they've learned that things may happen. I mean, obviously it's a 1 in a billion chance that someone's going to endure this more than once in their lifetime. But it has happened now. And hopefully they're already in treatment, continuing in treatment, and this will just be the next step of their recovery to work on this. But, this is the time for those communities and those families to really, be around those students and really keep watch over them and do what they need to do to make sure that the recovery for those students who have unfortunately had to go through this more than once continue to work on their traumas and how to get through it.
And in these situations too, we'd be remiss if we don't also think about those that responded to this tragedy. Certainly the police officers and the EMS that were on site from Michigan State University Police and Public Safety, as well as from local EMS, but also from departments that were in the immediate area and surrounding areas. I think about even my cousin who works for Livingston County EMS was also and lives in the Lansing area, was also called in to respond to this. You work with law enforcement on mental health matters and providing counseling to police officers in West Bloomfield. Speak to us about counseling for these individuals who see these sort of situations all the time. It's unfortunately in some cases par for the course in their career field, but that doesn't make that any easier each time it happens for them.
They do look at it a little differently than we do. I say to them all the time that, our witnessing of trauma versus their witnessing of trauma look different because they're more immune to it because they do see it way more frequently than we do. However, I do educate them on the importance of how it does impact them and the importance of being able to work through it. I'm hoping that the different departments that were involved last night do have their own crisis intervention that they have brought into place to work through what they went through last night. That's what crisis intervention stress management was developed for, was for that type of situation where the departments, or even for MSU now, the students will also go through crisis intervention stress management interventions right now to manage the initial crisis outcome of what's going on with them. So I'm hoping that the departments do that. Most of them are trained in it. A lot of the departments also have peer support teams to help with that as well. So that's my guess is what will happen. And then, the kind of state of the departments is changing a little bit, and many more of the police officers or first responders are reaching out for therapy services at this point as well. And so hopefully they will work with their therapist on it as well.
We're joined by Dr. Melanie Schwartz on today's edition of the MECAcast. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness, and also works very closely with the West Bloomfield Police Department, providing counseling services to local law enforcement and first responders in the West Bloomfield community. And Dr. Schwartz, just to go back to the general sense of counseling and addressing these sorts of situations for people across the board, it is so complicated because trauma affects people in a number of different ways. It hits people differently based on proximity, based on their past experiences, based on their natural fight or flight responses, and so many other factors. So For mental health professionals like yourself, what are you considering? What are you looking for? What are you putting together as you're planning to help individuals who have been a witness to a tragedy like this, who have been a victim of a tragedy like this, who are connected to someone who's been unfortunately involved in such a tragedy, to help them through a variety of different outcomes that can come from something like this?
Unfortunately, I feel like, at least Viewpoint, and I know probably across the board, we have all had to become trauma therapists over the last couple of years. And so we have really worked on specializing and working on our training in trauma and grief because of these repeated incidents that continue to happen, and the more and more clients that do come in who are dealing with trauma and grief. So I would say that unfortunately it's become the norm for us in how we treat our clients, is because that's what we're dealing with. That's who's walking in the door. That's what we're seeing in the country, in the community. And so we use our skills and our interventions that we've learned and that, we work with on a daily basis at this point.
And in terms of how this trauma may manifest, there's a number of different ways. Again, it goes back to just the many factors that go into how trauma affects one person versus another. But for those that may suffer in silence, which happens very often, whether it's in a traumatic situation like this or another mental health ailment that someone may be suffering from over time, what should people be looking out for those that may be suffering in silence here and may show some signs, some quieter signs of a traumatic effect from this event?
Okay. Well, it can really be anything, unfortunately. I mean, we could see anxiety. You can see somebody, having increased fears, not sleeping well, having nightmares, having flashbacks, which are just moments that kind of flash in front of you of the experience where you feel like you're in it. Um, you know, uh, Quicker heightened reaction to things, more irritability, avoidance of different situations. You might start to see some depression symptoms where people are isolating from things, they're losing interest, their mood has changed, they're more sad, they're more quiet. You may even start to see some suicidal thinking that comes from this. Change in appetite, change in just overall behavior or just patterns. So it's hard to kind of limit it to a small set of symptoms, because it could be pretty much anything that you could see. It's just, if you are noticing anything different in, friends, family, please, take the initiative to reach out to a professional who can help navigate this and figure out what's going on.
More information and resources to get in contact with Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness and their offices across our local area can be found on their website, viewpointpw.com, or call them 248-669-9500, 248-669-9500, and again, their website, viewpointpw.com. In terms of going back also to the law enforcement side of things, what should departments be doing to check in on those that may have been responding, whether it's police, fire, EMS, regardless? Not every department necessarily has those counseling resources right on hand or regularly in use in their particular department, but in that case that they don't, and they want to check in on these professionals that did respond and did provide such a swift and ultimately successful response and neutralizing the situation. How should they be going about that? What should they be looking for?
What I've learned over my work with law enforcement and first responders is that everybody knows people from other departments, and if you know somebody from one of these departments, please reach out to them. Again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, is just community right now, and support is the most important, and just reach out to the people were involved. Doesn't matter if they were a first responder, if they were a student, family, professor, whoever it was, just reach out to them and say, hey, what can I do to help right now? And do you need any help? Do you need any support? What do you need? And that goes just across the board for any human that was involved in any of this.
Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this unfortunate situation and all the really complicated issues that go into just responding to this on a basic level and helping people in the initial phases, but also as this goes on, because a trauma on one day isn't a trauma on one day at all. Any lasting thoughts or advice that you'd like to give to our audience, to those in the MSU community and those connected to it, those that have witnessed through the news or from on site about what happened in East Lansing on Monday and how they can recover?
I think, I said it across our interview today, just talk. Okay. Just make sure you're talking about it, making sure that you're using self-care with yourself, whatever that looks like. If, students need to leave campus right now and go home for a while, go home. Okay. Professors, whatever, just go home, get a break from it, be in your safe place wherever you need to be and do what you need to do to recover from this. But please, please, please just be talking about it. Do not keep it in. Do not isolate. Do not try and deal with it on your own. This is not something that we know how to deal with on our own. So please don't try.